Marcus Chen had always been a creature of habit. Every morning at 6:30, he would shuffle to his small apartment's kitchen, brew a pot of coffee that could wake the dead, and prepare for another day at the electronics repair shop he ran in downtown Seattle. The routine never changed except for one small detail that had started 3 months ago. The cats. It began with Shadow, a sleek black tomcat with bright yellow eyes who appeared on his fire escape. During a particularly nasty thunderstorm, Marcus had opened the window, thinking the poor thing just needed shelter for the night. But Shadow never left. Soon after, Whiskers arrived, a orange tabby with white paws who seemed to have an unusual intelligence behind her green eyes. Then came Patches, a calico with mismatched fur patterns that reminded Marcus of a patchwork quilt. But it was the fourth cat that truly puzzled him. She had no name yet because she had only arrived last week, and she was unlike any cat he had ever seen. Her fur was an impossible shade of deep purple black that seemed to shimmer in certain lights, and her eyes were the color of molten gold. She was larger than the others, more regal in her movements, and she watched everything with an intensity that made Marcus feel like he was being studied rather than simply observed. "You're a strange one, aren't you?" Marcus said as he poured kibble into 4 separate bowls. The purple-black cat, he had started calling her Majesty in his head, tilted her head at him with what looked suspiciously like amusement. Marcus had never planned to become a cat person. His life was simple, organized, predictable. He fixed broken electronics, lived alone in his 1-bedroom apartment, and generally avoided complications. But somehow these 4 strays had wormed their way into his routine and, if he was being honest, into his heart. The day everything changed started like any other. Marcus was hunched over a smartphone that had taken a swimming lesson in a toilet bowl when the bell above his shop door chimed. He looked up to see 3 people in expensive suits walking in. They moved with a predatory grace that immediately put him on edge. Marcus Chen, the leader, a tall woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, stepped forward. "That's me. What can I help you with?" Marcus set down his tools and wiped his hands on his work apron. "We understand you've been harboring some unusual animals. Specifically 4 cats." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Were there laws about how many pets you could have in the city?" had one of his neighbors complained. "They're just strays I've been feeding." "Is there a problem?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Chen, what you've been feeding aren't exactly cats." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the shop filled with a sound like breaking glass mixed with static electricity. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and suddenly Marcus couldn't move. His arms and legs felt like they were encased in invisible concrete. "Temporal suspension field," one of the other suited figures said matter-of-factly. "He won't remember any of this." "Search everything," the leader commanded.
"She has to be here somewhere."
The tracking signal was definitely coming from this location. Marcus tried to speak, tried to move, tried to do anything, but he could only watch helplessly as the 3 strangers began tearing apart his shop. They moved with scientific precision, scanning everything with devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. One of them pulled out what looked like a tablet, but the screen showed swirling patterns of light instead of any interface Marcus recognized. "Energy readings are definitely stronger in the back area," the man with the tablet reported. "Whatever she's been doing it near his living space," the woman nodded. "She's clever, hiding among primitive earth fauna, using this human as unwitting cover." She turned her cold gaze toward Marcus, even though he couldn't respond. Too bad for him that his kindness has made him a liability. They continued their search for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Marcus's mind raced even though his body was frozen. What did they mean the cats weren't really cats? And why did they keep referring to she, as if they were looking for someone specific? Finally, the tablet-wielding man shook his head. "Nothing. If she was here, she's gone now." "Impossible," the leader hissed. "The quantum signature was definitive. She's been in this area for weeks. Maybe she detected our approach and fled." The woman's expression darkened. "Then we'll have to expand our search. But first," she pulled out a small silver device and pointed it at Marcus. "Memory reformation. He'll forget we were ever here." The device hummed with energy, and Marcus felt something probing at the edges of his thoughts. But just as the machine reached full power, something remarkable happened. The shop door exploded inward, and through the shower of glass and twisted metal stepped a figure that made Marcus's frozen heart skip a beat. It was a woman, but not quite human. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to shift between pale and metallic bronze depending on the angle of the light. Her hair flowed like liquid darkness shot through with veins of gold in her eyes. Her eyes were the same molten gold color he had seen in Majesty's gaze. "Release him," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "Now." The suited woman spun around and her face went white. "Impossible. You're supposed to be dead?" The newcomer smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like polished pearl. "Clearly your intelligence was lacking. As usual, Regent Voss." Regent Voss raised her hand and energy began crackling between her fingers. "Queen Zarathan of the Drakmor Empire, by the authority of the Galactic Council, you are under arrest for war crimes against 17 member species." Queen Zarathan laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of crystal. "The Galactic Council has no authority over me, little Regent. And you've made a critical error." "What error?" The Queen's form began to shimmer and change, growing larger, more imposing. "You threatened someone under my protection." The last thing Marcus saw before everything went white was the suited figures scrambling for weapons they would never have time to use, and golden eyes that promised a reckoning was coming. When Marcus opened his eyes, he was lying on his apartment floor with a splitting headache and the taste of copper in his mouth. Sunlight streamed through his windows at completely the wrong angle, suggesting hours had passed since he last remembered being conscious. He sat up slowly, his head spinning, and tried to piece together what had happened. His shop. There had been people in suits. They had done something to him, frozen him somehow. And then there had been a woman with golden eyes and impossible height who had called herself a queen. "You're awake." The voice came from his kitchen, calm and measured. Marcus turned to see a woman sitting at his small dining table, cradling a cup of what smelled like his coffee. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with dark hair that caught light like it was woven with metallic threads, and those same golden eyes from his memory. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater that he was pretty sure belonged to him. But they looked strange on her, like a costume that didn't quite fit. "You're—" Marcus started, then stopped. His rational mind was telling him this was impossible, but the evidence was sitting right in front of him. "You're the woman from my shop," she nodded. "I am Zarathan, though you've known me by another name for the past week." Understanding dawned on him like a cold splash of water. "Majesty?" "Yes." She took a sip of coffee and made a face. "How do humans consume this toxic brew? It tastes like burned dirt mixed with bitterness." Marcus stood up on shaky legs and looked around his apartment. Everything seemed normal, except for the absence of 3 particular cats. "Where are Shadow, Whiskers, and Patches? They were never here to begin with." Zarathan set down the coffee cup with obvious relief. "They were holographic projections I created to maintain the illusion of being a normal Earth feline. It seemed less suspicious to be part of a group than to be a lone cat appearing on your fire escape." Holographic projections. Marcus rubbed his temples, trying to process this information. "So you're telling me I've been buying cat food and setting up litter boxes for fake cats? I appreciate the effort, but I have not required Earth sustenance during my stay here." She paused, and something like guilt flickered across her features. "I apologize for the deception. It was necessary for both our safety." Marcus walked to his kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, needing something to do with his hands. "Those people in my shop, they called you Queen of the Drakmor Empire?" "That is correct. And they accused you of war crimes." Zarathan's expression hardened. "They accused. They did not prove. There is a significant difference, as your human legal systems would acknowledge. But did you do it?" The question came out before Marcus could stop himself. He was standing in his kitchen asking an alien queen if she was a war criminal. His Tuesday had officially become the weirdest day of his life. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out his window at the Seattle skyline. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "I defended my people. The Galactic Council deemed my methods excessive." "What kind of methods?" "The kind that ensured the Vortok swarm could never again consume entire worlds full of sentient beings." Her golden eyes met his, and Marcus saw something in them that made him take a step back. Not malice, but a depth of power that was almost frightening. "I burned their breeding worlds, all 17 of them. The Council considered this genocide. I considered it pest control." Marcus set down his water glass. He was way out of his depth here, but something about her tone, the way she spoke about protecting people, made him ask, "And that's why you're here? On Earth, hiding?" "Running would be more accurate." She stood and moved to the window, her movements carrying a grace that seemed almost liquid. The Drakmor Empire fell to a coalition of council forces 6 months ago. My people were scattered, my fleet destroyed. I managed to escape, but I was wounded, exhausted. I needed somewhere to recover where they would never think to look. And you chose Earth because your species is not part of the Galactic Council. Because Earth is considered a primitive world of no strategic importance. Because... She turned back to him with something that might have been a smile. Because the energy signature of this planet is remarkably similar to my homeworld. It felt familiar. Marcus found himself smiling despite the insanity of the situation. "So you decided to turn into a cat?" "The transformation was practical. Your species has an inexplicable fondness for small domesticated predators. I calculated that appearing as a feline in distress would appeal to the protective instincts I observed in human behavior patterns." "You studied us before you came here?" "Basic reconnaissance. I learned that humans often take in stray animals, providing shelter and sustenance without expectation of return. It seemed efficient." There was something in the way she said it that made Marcus pause. "But that's not really why you stayed, is it?" Zarathan turned away from the window, and for a moment, her carefully composed mask slipped. "I was injured, alone, and hunted. I had not experienced genuine kindness in a very long time. When you opened your window that night during the storm, you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask what I could offer you in return. You simply saw a creature in need and provided help." She met his eyes again. "That is not common in my experience of the galaxy, Marcus Chen. It's just what you do," Marcus said with a shrug. "I mean, what kind of person leaves a cat out in a thunderstorm?" "The vast majority of beings I have encountered throughout my life." The simple honesty in her statement hit Marcus harder than he expected. Here was someone who commanded starships and ruled an empire, and she was genuinely amazed by basic human decency. "Well, most humans aren't like that. Perhaps. But you are." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, and Marcus found himself really looking at her for the first time. Despite her otherworldly beauty and the power that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire, there was something fundamentally lonely about Zarathan. Something that spoke to the part of him that had always been drawn to strays and broken things. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. "Now Regent Voss and her hunters know I was here. They will return with greater numbers and more sophisticated detection equipment. I cannot remain on Earth without putting your entire species at risk. And you? Where will you go?" Zarathan looked out the window again, and Marcus realized she was looking up at the sky. "I do not know. The galaxy is not safe for me now. Perhaps I will find some distant world where I can live quietly. Or," Marcus heard himself saying, "you could stay and fight back." She turned to stare at him. "Excuse me? You said your people were scattered, not destroyed. And it sounds like this Galactic Council has some serious issues if they're calling you a war criminal for stopping genocidal bugs." Marcus couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. But something about her story, about the way she talked about protecting people, made him continue. "Maybe it's time someone stood up to them. Marcus, you do not understand the scope of what you're suggesting. The Council commands thousands of worlds, millions of ships. Yeah, but they don't have something you do." "And what is that?" Marcus smiled. "They don't have humans." Zarathan stared at Marcus as if he had just suggested they fight gravity itself. "Humans," she repeated slowly. "Marcus, your species has barely achieved interplanetary travel. You lack faster-than-light communication, energy shields, or quantum manipulation technology. What could humans possibly offer against an interstellar coalition?" Marcus walked to his refrigerator and pulled out 2 beers, offering one to the displaced alien queen sitting in his kitchen. When she declined with a wrinkled nose, he opened his and took a long drink. "You know what I do for a living, right?" "You repair electronic devices." "Right, and do you know why I'm good at it?" He didn't wait for her answer. "Because when something's broken, I don't just look at what it's supposed to do. I look at what it's actually doing, find the problem, and fix it from the inside. Most people try to force the machine to work the way they think it should. I work with what I've got." "I fail to see how this relates to galactic warfare." Marcus set his beer down and leaned against the counter. "You're thinking like someone who plays by the rules. Like someone who's part of the system. But humans? We're not part of your system. We don't know the rules, which means we don't know what's impossible. Ignorance is not an advantage, Marcus, isn't it? He grinned, feeling more confident than he had any right to feel. Tell me about the Vortex Swarm. How did the galaxy deal with them before you stepped in? Zarathan's expression darkened. They tried negotiation first, naturally. The Council always believes diplomatic solutions are preferable. When that failed, they attempted containment strategies, trying to limit the swarm's expansion while seeking a peaceful resolution. And how well did that work? The Vortex consumed 14 worlds during the diplomatic phase alone. Their reproduction rate increased exponentially with each planet they devoured. By the time the Council authorized military intervention, the swarm had become too large for conventional warfare to stop. So the Council's solution was to keep doing the same thing that wasn't working, just with bigger guns. That is, an oversimplification but not entirely inaccurate. Marcus nodded, and then you came along and burned their breeding worlds. Problem solved. How long did it take you? 18 months of preparation, 3 weeks of execution. 3 weeks. Marcus shook his head. The Council spent years trying to negotiate with literal planet eaters, and you solved the problem in 3 weeks. But they called you a war criminal. Because I bypassed their authority. Because I acted unilaterally. Because I prioritized results over process. Because you made them look like idiots. Zarathan was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes studying his face. You have an interesting perspective on galactic politics for someone whose species is still debating whether climate change is real. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Marcus pointed his beer bottle at her for emphasis. You just proved my point. Humans argue about everything. We're stubborn, we're contrary, and we absolutely refuse to accept that. Something can't be done just because someone in authority says so. These traits do not sound advantageous, and they are when you're fighting people who've forgotten how to think outside the box. Tell me, in all your experience with the Galactic Council, have they ever surprised you? Surprised me. Done something unexpected, something that made you go, I never saw that coming. Zarathan considered this. No, the Council is remarkably predictable. They follow established protocols, maintain traditional power structures, and rarely deviate from proven strategies. Right. They're bureaucrats. They've got their procedures and their committees and their proper channels. But humans? Marcus laughed. We'll try anything. We'll stick explosives to a shark just to see what happens. We'll duct tape a solution together if we have to. We'll fight a war with whatever we can find lying around. Duct tape? Never mind. The point is, we improvise, we adapt, and we absolutely hate being told we can't do something. Zarathan stood and began pacing his small kitchen, her movements restless and predatory. Even if what you suggest had merit, there remains a fundamental problem. Humanity is not aware that galactic civilization exists. Your governments would never believe such claims without proof. So give them proof. You're suggesting I reveal myself to your entire species. I'm suggesting we start small and work our way up. Marcus could feel an idea forming, the same kind of creative problem-solving instinct that helped him fix the most challenging electronics. You said the Council thinks Earth is primitive and unimportant, right? That's why you hid here. Correct. So they're not watching us closely. They're not expecting us to be a threat, which means we have time to prepare, to build up our capabilities without them noticing. Build up how? Your technology is centuries behind even basic Council standards. Our current technology may be. But humans are really good at learning new tricks when we're motivated, and nothing motivates humans like being told we're not good enough. Marcus finished his beer and set the bottle down with a clink that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the apartment. Besides, you're here now. You know their technology. You could teach us. Marcus, you're suggesting that I single-handedly uplift an entire civilization to galactic standards, and then somehow convince them to wage war against a coalition of thousands of worlds. The logistics alone would be impossible. Who said anything about uplifting the whole civilization? And who said anything about conventional war? Marcus grinned. Remember what I do for a living. I find the broken part and fix it. I don't rebuild the whole machine. Explain. The Council isn't really thousands of worlds, is it? It's a government. Which means it's got the same weaknesses every government has. Corruption. Bureaucracy. People in charge who care more about staying in power than doing the right thing. Am I right? Zarathan stopped pacing and fixed him with those unsettling golden eyes. You are. Disturbingly accurate. Then we don't fight their armies. We don't even fight them exactly. We fix the system from the inside. We find the good people who are trapped in a bad system and help them fix it. And you believe humans would be willing to involve themselves in such an undertaking? Marcus thought about that seriously. He thought about every war movie he'd ever seen. Every story about humans standing up to bullies and tyrants. He thought about the people he knew. Ordinary people who would do extraordinary things when pushed far enough. Let me ask you something, he said finally. If the Council is so powerful, so in control, why are they hunting you? You said your empire fell, your fleet was destroyed. If you're really beaten, why not just ignore you? Because... Zarathan paused and Marcus could see her working through the implications. Because I represent something they cannot control. A precedent. If other species see that the Council can be defied, that their authority is not absolute. Exactly. You're not just a war criminal to them. You're proof that their system can be beaten, and that scares them more than any army. Zarathan was quiet for a long moment, staring out his window at the city beyond. When she spoke, her voice was soft. What you're suggesting would be incredibly dangerous. If we failed, the consequences for your species would be catastrophic. And if we don't try, how long before the Council decides Earth is useful for something? Or before something like the Vortax swarm shows up and the Council spends years talking while people die? That is a valid concern. Marcus could see her wavering, could see the queen and warrior beneath the facade of the weary exile. Look, I'm not saying we start a revolution tomorrow. I'm saying we start small. We find some allies, we learn what we're dealing with, and we see what's possible. Maybe it doesn't work out. But maybe, he shrugged, maybe a few strays can surprise everyone. For the first time since he'd met her, Zarathan smiled. It was small but genuine, and it transformed her entire face. You realize that if we do this, there will be no going back. Your simple life will be over forever. Marcus looked around his small apartment at his routine, predictable existence. Then he looked at her. This impossible woman who had fallen into his life as a stray cat and turned out to be the key to everything he never knew he wanted. Good, he said. 3 weeks later, Marcus found himself standing in an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district of Seattle, wondering how his life had become so wonderfully insane. The space had been empty for months before Zarathan worked some kind of alien magic on it, and now it hummed with technology that shouldn't have existed for another 100 years. The quantum resonance field is stable, Zarathan announced, her hands dancing over a control panel that looked like someone had mixed a computer keyboard with a piece of modern art. We can begin. The first phase of integration testing. Marcus looked up from the workbench where he'd been trying to understand the principles behind Drakmor technology. It was like learning calculus while standing on his head. Everything he thought he knew about physics kept getting turned upside down. Integration testing? Teaching human technology to interface with galactic standard systems. She gestured to the collection of smartphones, laptops, and various electronic devices scattered around the modified warehouse. Your devices are primitive, but they have potential. The human approach to information processing is uniquely chaotic, thanks, I think. It was meant as a compliment. Chaos can be an advantage when properly channeled. The past 3 weeks had been a crash course in redefining possible. Zarathan had started by showing him how to modify his own electronics to detect energy signatures that human science couldn't even name. Then she'd taught him to build what she called bridge devices, technology that could translate between human and galactic systems. But the real revelation had come when Marcus introduced her to the internet. Your species has created an instantaneous global communication network, she had said, staring at his laptop screen with something approaching awe. And you use it primarily to share images of cats and argue about trivial matters. Pretty much. Yeah, it's perfect. That's when Marcus realized that Zarathan didn't just understand technology, she understood people. She saw what the internet really was. Humanity's first attempt at something approaching galactic-level information sharing. Raw, unfiltered, and completely outside any government's ability to fully control. Now they were using that network to quietly recruit the first members of what Zarathan had started calling the Coalition for Galactic Reform. It was a grandiose name for what was essentially a very small group of very confused humans. But everyone had to start somewhere. The warehouse door opened, and 3 figures walked in. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a physicist from the University of Washington who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about quantum mechanics for years. James Park, a software engineer who specialized in encryption and had noticed some very strange signals in satellite data, and Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, recently retired from the Air Force and still asking questions about certain classified incidents that officially never happened. "Please tell me this isn't an elaborate prank," Dr. Martinez said, looking around at the modified warehouse with wide eyes. "Because if it is, it's the most expensive prank in history." "Not a prank," Marcus assured her, "though I understand if you need a minute to process." "Process what exactly?" Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her military bearing intact despite her casual clothes. "Your message said you had proof of extraterrestrial contact, but this looks like someone's garage experiment gone wrong." Zarathan stepped out from behind the main control panel, and Marcus watched as three very intelligent humans forgot how to speak. Even in simple human clothes, there was something unmistakably otherworldly about her presence. "Greetings," she said formally. "I am Queen Zarathan of the Drakmor Empire. Marcus has assured me that you can be trusted with information that will fundamentally alter your understanding of reality." James Park sat down heavily on a nearby crate. Okay, I'm processing. Aliens are real, they look like humans, but more impressive. And one of them is apparently royalty. Did I miss anything? She was hiding as my cat until recently, Marcus added helpfully. Right, of course she was. James rubbed his temples. Because that makes perfect sense. Dr. Martinez, meanwhile, was approaching one of the modified workbenches with the focused intensity of a scientist encountering something genuinely new. "These energy readings, this is impossible. The quantum field fluctuations alone should have torn apart half the city. Impossible is a word I've learned to avoid around humans," Zarathan observed. "Your species has a tendency to prove it wrong." "Why us?" Lieutenant Colonel Hayes asked bluntly. "Why are you revealing yourself to humans? What do you want?" Zarathan gestured to a collection of holographic displays that shimmered to life, showing star maps and data that made Marcus's head hurt. "I want to prevent a war that will consume millions of worlds, and I believe humanity represents the key to that prevention." "How?" "Because you think differently, because you're not part of the existing galactic power structure, and because—" She paused, glancing at Marcus with something that might have been affection. "Because humans have a remarkable tendency to help strays." Over the next 2 hours, Zarathan explained the situation. The Galactic Council's growing authoritarianism, the suppression of species that refuse to conform to their standards. The way bureaucracy had replaced justice, and fear had replaced freedom. "So you're asking us to start a revolution," Dr. Martinez said finally. "I'm asking you to help me fix a broken system," Zarathan corrected. "Revolution implies destruction. What we need is evolution." "And our role in this evolution?" James asked. Marcus stepped forward. This was the part he'd been thinking about for weeks. "We're the wild cards. We don't know the rules, so we can't be predicted. And we have something the Council has forgotten how to do, which is, we innovate. We improvise. We look at a problem and ask, what if we tried something completely different?" Lieutenant Colonel Hayes crossed her arms. "You realize this sounds insane, right? A handful of humans taking on an interstellar government?" "It does," Marcus agreed. "But let me ask you something. Have any of you ever been in a situation where you were told something couldn't be done, and you did it anyway?" The responses came almost simultaneously. Dr. Martinez, proving quantum. Entanglement maintained coherence at room temperature. James, breaking government. Encryption that was supposedly unbreakable. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, successfully completing a rescue mission that command said was impossible. Right, Marcus said. Now imagine what happens when we apply that same thinking to galactic politics. The variables are too complex, Dr. Martinez protested. The technology gap alone is smaller than you think, Zarathan interrupted. Humans are perhaps a century behind in raw technology, but you're centuries ahead in creative application. Your internet, for instance, represents a more sophisticated approach to information distribution than most galactic civilizations have achieved. You're serious about this, James said, looking around the group. You're actually suggesting we try to reform galactic civilization. I'm suggesting we try to save it, Zarathan replied. The Council's current path leads to stagnation and eventual collapse. Too many voices have been silenced. Too many innovative approaches have been suppressed. The galaxy needs fresh perspectives. And if we refuse? Lieutenant Colonel Hayes asked. Zarathan was quiet for a moment. Then I will disappear, find some distant world where I can live quietly, and watch as the galaxy slowly destroys itself through bureaucratic paralysis. And eventually, when your species becomes advanced enough to draw the Council's attention, you'll face the same choice I did: conform or be crushed. Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling over the group. These were smart people. People who understood the implications of what they were being offered, but they were also humans, which meant they understood something else: the opportunity to do something that mattered. Dr. Martinez broke the silence. What would we need to do first? Zarathan smiled, and Marcus saw the queen she had once been, the leader who had commanded starships and defended worlds. We start by proving that human ingenuity can solve problems that have stymied the galaxy for generations. I have a list of challenges that the Council has declared unsolvable, such as faster-than-light communication without massive energy expenditure, quantum processing without exotic matter requirements, and most importantly, she gestured to another holographic display that showed complex orbital mechanics, peaceful integration of aggressive species into galactic civilization. James leaned forward, his programmer's mind clearly engaging with the technical challenges. And you think we can solve these problems? I think humans will approach them differently than anyone else has. And sometimes a fresh perspective is all it takes to find a solution that's been hiding in plain sight. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes straightened, and Marcus recognized the moment when a military officer accepted a mission. What do you need from us? Your expertise, your creativity, and your willingness to think beyond the boundaries that limit the rest of the galaxy, Zarathan replied. In return, I can offer you technology, knowledge, and the chance to shape the future of interstellar civilization. Marcus looked around the group and saw the same expression on every face, the look of people who had just realized their lives were about to become extraordinary. All right, he said, let's fix the galaxy. 6 months after the warehouse meeting, Marcus stood on the bridge of what had once been a Drakmor scout ship and was now humanity's first functional starship. The modifications were visible everywhere. Human interfaces grafted onto alien controls, Earth-manufactured components integrated with technology that could manipulate space-time itself. FTL communication array is online, James reported from his position at what they'd nicknamed the Chaos Console, a human-designed interface that could coordinate 17 different alien systems simultaneously. We're connected to the Resistance network on 43 worlds. Quantum processors are stable, Dr. Martinez added. She'd spent months figuring out how to replace exotic matter requirements with what she called creative physics, essentially tricking alien technology into thinking it had resources it didn't actually need. The new hybrid systems are running at 94% efficiency. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, now serving as their military advisor and chief of security, looked up from her strategic displays. Intelligence reports are coming in from our contacts in the Council territories. The situation is accelerating. Marcus nodded grimly. What had started as a small reform movement had grown into something much larger and more dangerous. Word of human involvement had spread through underground networks across the galaxy, and apparently, the idea of a non-council species solving impossible problems was causing quite a stir. Show me the latest developments, he said. The main display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of local galactic space. Red zones indicated areas of civil unrest. Yellow zones showed worlds requesting assistance, and green zones marked successful implementations of human-designed solutions. 18 worlds have successfully integrated the hybrid communication systems, Hayes reported. 12 have implemented the new quantum processing protocols. And the Kepler system, she paused, a smile creeping across her face. The Kepler system used our mediation protocols to achieve peaceful integration with the Rakthol warrior clans. The species that's been fighting the Council for 3 centuries? Marcus asked. The same ones. Turns out the whole conflict was based on a cultural misunderstanding that nobody had bothered to actually address. It took our anthropology team about 6 weeks to figure out the real problem and design a solution. Zarathan, who had been quietly monitoring their newest project, looked up from her workstation. The Council is not pleased with these developments. Define not pleased, Marcus said. Regent Voss has been granted emergency powers to deal with what they're calling the human contamination. She now commands a fleet of 200 ships and has authorization to use any means necessary to restore galactic stability. Dr. Martinez looked up sharply. Any means necessary? In galactic politics, that phrase typically precedes the sterilization of problematic worlds. The bridge fell silent. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. What had started as helping a stray cat had somehow evolved into a situation where Earth itself might be under threat. How long do we have? He asked. The fleet is mobilizing now. Based on their standard deployment patterns, I estimate 3 weeks before they reach this system. 3 weeks to do what? We have 1 ship and a handful of allies scattered across 43 worlds. We have something more valuable than ships, James said quietly. We have proof that the Council's way isn't the only way. That's not going to stop 200 warships. It might, Zarathan said. If we can get that proof to the right people. She manipulated the display, zooming in on a sector near the galactic core. The Council operates on consensus, but that consensus is maintained through information control. Most member species only know what the Council wants them to know. If we could broadcast the truth about our successes, about the alternatives we've created, you're talking about a propaganda war, Hayes said. I'm talking about giving people information they've been denied, Zarathan corrected. The Council has claimed for centuries that their methods are the only viable approaches to galactic governance. We've proven otherwise. Marcus studied the star map, his electronics repair instincts kicking in. What's the problem with their information control? How do they maintain it? Centralized communication networks with strict oversight protocols, James answered. All official communications go through Council relay stations. Unauthorized broadcasts are blocked or traced back to their sources. Right, so we don't use their network. Marcus, there isn't another network. The Council system is the only galaxy-wide communication infrastructure. Marcus grinned. Wrong, there's always another network. We just have to build it. He moved to the main console and began pulling up technical specifications.
James, remember when you showed me how hackers used to communicate during government crackdowns?
Mesh networks, peer-to-peer connections, routing around damage? Yeah, but that was planetary scale. We're talking about interstellar distances, so we scale up. Zarathan, you said the quantum entanglement principles we've been working with can maintain coherence across galactic distances, right? In theory, yes, but the power requirements would be enormous. What if we don't need massive power? What if we use the same distributed approach we've been developing? Marcus was getting excited now, the pieces clicking together in his mind. Instead of one big transmitter, we build thousands of small ones. Each ship, each station, each world becomes a relay point. Dr. Martinez was already running calculations on her tablet. The mathematics could work. Distributed quantum entanglement networks. It would be like creating a galactic internet. Exactly. And once we have that, we can bypass all of their information controls. The technical challenges alone would take months to solve, James protested. Or we could do it in 3 weeks if we think like humans instead of galactic engineers, Marcus countered. Remember, we don't have to make it perfect. We just have to make it work. Zarathan moved to stand beside him, and Marcus could see the strategic mind that had once commanded an empire beginning to engage. If we could establish even temporary communication with our allies across the galaxy, coordinate simultaneous broadcasts on dozens of worlds. The Council couldn't stop them all, Hayes finished. Classic information warfare tactics. Overwhelm the enemy's ability to respond by hitting too many targets at once. But we need content for those broadcasts, Marcus pointed out. Proof that our methods work. Evidence of Council failures, testimonials from worlds that have benefited from human solutions. We have all of that, Dr. Martinez said. 6 months of documented successes, recorded testimonials, comparative analyses showing our approaches versus Council standard procedures. Then we need to package it in a way that will resonate with different species across the galaxy, Marcus continued. Not as propaganda, but as information. Let people draw their own conclusions. James was already pulling up programming interfaces. I can design adaptive presentation protocols. Same information, formatted appropriately for different cognitive patterns and cultural contexts. How long? Zarathan asked. For the basic framework? 72 hours if I don't sleep. I can handle the hardware integration, Dr. Martinez added. If Marcus helps with the hybrid human-alien interfaces, and I can coordinate with our contacts on the other worlds, get them ready to implement and broadcast, Hayes said. Marcus looked around at his team, a physicist, a programmer, a military strategist, and a displaced alien queen. 3 weeks ago, this would have seemed impossible. Now it just seemed like another Tuesday. All right, he said. Let's build a galactic internet and start a peaceful revolution. What could go wrong? Zarathan's expression was serious, but Marcus caught the hint of a smile at the edges. Famous last words among humans, I believe. Yeah, but we have a pretty good track record with famous last words. Usually they're followed by, but we did it anyway. As his team scattered to begin the most ambitious project in human history, Marcus found himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them here. A stray cat in a thunderstorm, a simple act of kindness. Sometimes the smallest gestures had the biggest consequences. Zarathan, he called out as she headed toward her workstation. Yes? For the record, you were definitely the most interesting cat I ever helped. Her laugh was like music made of starlight. Marcus Chen, you have no idea how interesting things are about to become. The first sign that their plan was working came 12 hours before the Council fleet was scheduled to arrive in the Sol system. Marcus was monitoring the quantum communication array when James's excited voice crackled through the ship's intercom. Marcus, get up here. You need to see this. Marcus rushed to the main bridge to find his team gathered around displays showing incoming transmission data from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. 47 worlds have implemented our mesh network protocols, James reported, his fingers dancing across multiple keyboards simultaneously. The information is spreading faster than we projected. Each world is acting as a relay point for dozens of others. The Council is trying to shut down traditional communication networks, Dr. Martinez added, but they can't block quantum entanglement transmissions they don't know exist. Our data is routing around their blocks automatically. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes pointed to a tactical display showing ship movements throughout local space. More importantly, look at this. Council fleets in 6 sectors have received stand-down orders. Local commanders are refusing to engage targets until they can verify the information they're receiving. Marcus stared at the displays in amazement. It's working. They're actually listening. More than listening, Zarathan said, approaching from her monitoring station. 3 worlds have formally withdrawn from Council jurisdiction. 7 others have suspended Council authority pending investigation of the information we've provided. And, she paused, something like wonder in her voice. The Rakthul clans have offered military assistance. The warrior species that just made peace in the Kepler system? The same. Apparently, they're quite impressed with human problem-solving methods. They've offered to provide security for worlds that want to experiment with our approaches. Hayes smiled grimly. Nothing motivates galactic politicians like the prospect of losing military support. Marcus moved to the main console, where data streams were flowing in from across known space. Testimonials from world leaders, technical reports comparing human solutions to Council standard approaches, economic analyses showing improved efficiency and reduced resource consumption. The evidence was overwhelming and, more importantly, it was being shared freely among species that had never had direct communication with each other. The network is becoming self-sustaining, James observed. Worlds are starting to modify our protocols, improve them, share their own innovations. It's like watching the birth of a galactic collaborative consciousness. That's exactly what it is, Dr. Martinez said excitedly. We've created the infrastructure for true galactic democracy. Direct communication between species, unfiltered information exchange, collaborative problem-solving on a scale that's never existed before. A new alarm chimed, and Zarathan moved quickly to her station. Long-range sensors detect the Council fleet. They've dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. How many ships? 200 as projected. Led by Regent Voss's flagship. She paused, studying her readings. But they're not advancing. They're holding position. Waiting for orders, Hayes interpreted. Orders that may not be coming. The main communication array suddenly came alive with an incoming transmission. The image that appeared on the main screen was familiar. Regent Voss, looking significantly less confident than she had during their encounter in Marcus's electronics shop. This is Regent Voss of the Galactic Council to the unauthorized human vessel. Her voice carried across the bridge. You will cease all broadcasting activities immediately and surrender for processing. Marcus stepped forward, feeling the weight of history settling on his shoulders. This is Marcus Chen, representing the Coalition for Galactic Reform. Regent Voss, you're interrupting a democratic information exchange. Under what authority do you claim the right to censor communication between sovereign worlds? Under the authority granted to me by the Galactic Council to restore order and stability. Order and stability? Dr. Martinez stepped into view of the communication pickup. Regent, we've just spent 6 months demonstrating that there are more effective approaches to galactic governance than the ones your council has been using. Approaches that achieve better results with fewer resources and less conflict. Unauthorized interventions in council affairs. Innovations, James corrected from off-camera. Solutions to problems your council declared unsolvable. Voss's expression hardened. You will cease these transmissions and submit to council authority, or I will be forced to take action against your world. The bridge fell silent. This was the moment Marcus had been dreading, the point where talk might give way to violence. But before he could respond, Zarathan stepped into the transmission field, her presence immediately commanding attention. Regent Voss, she said quietly, you trained at the Council Academy on Zirian Prime, class of 2387. Your thesis was on innovative approaches to interspecies conflict resolution. Voss's face went pale. Queen Zarathan, yes, and I remember your thesis, Regent. It was quite brilliant. You proposed that the Council's rigid adherence to established protocols was preventing effective solutions to emerging challenges. You suggested that fresh perspectives from diverse sources could lead to breakthrough innovations in galactic governance. That was a long time ago, 28 years ago. Tell me, Regent, what happened to the woman who wrote those words? Marcus watched as something shifted in Voss's expression. The hard mask of authority wavered, revealing something more human underneath. The council happened, Voss said finally. The system happened. You learned quickly that innovation is discouraged when it threatens established power structures. And yet, Zarathan continued gently, here we are, proving that your thesis was correct. These humans have accomplished in 6 months what your council has been unable to achieve in centuries. They've solved the Ractal integration crisis. They've developed more efficient communication protocols. They've created solutions that work. Solutions that threaten galactic stability. Solutions that threaten galactic stagnation, Marcus interjected. Regent, you've got incoming data from 47 worlds that have implemented our approaches. Instead of threatening us, why not look at the results we've achieved? A new voice joined the conversation as Hayes stepped forward. Regent, as a military officer, I'm curious about something. How many conflicts has the Council resolved through force in the past century? That information is classified. And how many have been resolved through negotiation and understanding? Voss was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired. Too few. We've resolved 17 interspecies conflicts in 6 months using collaborative problem-solving approaches, Hayes continued. Not through force, not through imposed authority, but through understanding and innovation. Doesn't that suggest there might be better ways to maintain galactic stability? Marcus could see the conflict playing out on Voss's face. She was a career council officer, trained to follow orders and maintain established authority. But she was also, apparently, someone who had once believed in innovation and reform. Even if what you claim is true, she said finally, I have my orders. The Council has declared your activities a threat to galactic security. The Council has declared innovation a threat to their power, Zarathan corrected. There's a difference, perhaps. But I am bound by my oath of service. Marcus felt inspiration strike. What if we could prove that our approach actually strengthens galactic security? What if we could demonstrate that collaboration achieves better results than coercion? What are you proposing? A test? Give us one problem that the Council has been unable to solve. Something that threatens galactic stability. Let us work on it using our methods and you work on it using yours. See which approach produces better results. Voss stared at him through the transmission. You would stake your world's safety on such a test? Marcus looked around at his team. Dr. Martinez nodded. James gave him a thumbs up. Hayes straightened to attention, and Zarathan smiled with quiet confidence. We would, he said, because we believe that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to find creative solutions to impossible problems. And sometimes the best way to prove something works is to show it in action. Voss was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could almost see the war between duty and conscience playing out behind her eyes. Finally, she spoke. There is a situation, the Zephyr Nebula system. 3 species in constant conflict. Resources stretched to breaking point. Council mediation efforts have failed repeatedly over 50 years. The situation is becoming critical. What kind of critical? Hayes asked. The kind that could destabilize an entire sector and potentially trigger a cascade conflict involving dozens of worlds. Marcus felt his team tense around him. This wasn't just a test. It was potentially the kind of large-scale crisis that could affect billions of lives. How long do we have? He asked. Standard council protocol suggests 6 months minimum for any viable solution. We'll do it in 6 weeks, Marcus said. The words coming out before his rational mind could stop them. Voss actually laughed. 6 weeks? Mr. Chen, this is not a broken electronic device. This is an intractable conflict involving complex cultural, economic, and territorial factors. Perfect, Marcus replied. Those are exactly the kind of problems humans are good at solving. 5 weeks and 6 days later, Marcus stood in what had once been the most contested system in the galaxy, watching 3 previously hostile species work together to build something unprecedented. The Zephyr Nebula stretched around them like a cosmic aurora, its swirling colors now serving as the backdrop for construction projects rather than battlefields. Final integration test is complete, Dr. Martinez announced from her position aboard the newly constructed orbital platform. The Tri-Species Manufacturing Consortium is operating at 112% projected efficiency. Resource allocation algorithms are stable, James added. The collaborative management system is handling distribution conflicts automatically. No manual intervention required for the past 72 hours. Marcus smiled as he watched Zephyrian crystal builders working alongside nebular gas farmers and stellar metallurgists to construct something none of them could have built alone. A hybrid station that could process resources from all 3 environments simultaneously, creating products that were more valuable than the sum of their parts. How? Regent Voss's voice came through their communication link from her flagship, which had maintained position at the edge of the system throughout their work. The Council has spent 50 years trying to mediate resource conflicts between these species. How did you solve it in 6 weeks? Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, now serving as their diplomatic liaison, answered from the command center. We didn't solve the conflict, Regent. We made it irrelevant. Explain. Marcus moved to the main display, which showed the elegant solution they'd developed. The 3 species weren't really fighting over resources. They were fighting over the right to use their traditional methods in spaces that weren't designed for those methods. I don't understand. The Zephyrians are crystal builders, Dr. Martinez explained. They create structures by growing crystalline matrices. The nebulars are gas farmers. They cultivate energy-rich compounds in gaseous environments. The stellars are metallurgists who forge tools and structures from stellar materials. Each species tried to terraform the system to match their needs, Hayes continued, but that meant destroying the environments the other species required. Classic zero-sum thinking, Marcus nodded. So instead of trying to make them share limited resources, we asked a different question. What if they could create unlimited resources by working together? The hybrid station, Zarathan said, her voice carrying pride as she monitored the construction from their ship's bridge. It combines all 3 approaches: crystal matrices that can channel stellar energy, to create gas compounds that can be forged into materials that can grow new crystal structures, a closed-loop system that becomes more productive over time. But the technical challenges alone were solved by thinking like humans instead of thinking like bureaucrats, James interrupted. We didn't try to find a compromise between 3 existing approaches. We invented a 4th approach that made all 3 approaches more effective. Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing resource production figures. The consortium is now producing more useful materials than all 3 species were producing individually before the conflict started. Everyone wins. Impossible. The economic models clearly show. The economic models assume scarcity, Dr. Martinez said gently. But when you combine 3 different approaches to resource manipulation, scarcity becomes abundance. The math changes completely. Regent Voss was quiet for several long minutes. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of wonder. You're saying that the fundamental assumptions underlying council policy were wrong? Not wrong, Marcus corrected. Just limited. The council approaches problems by trying to fairly distribute limited resources. We approach problems by trying to create unlimited resources through collaboration. And this approach works in other situations? It's worked in every situation we've tried it on, Hayes confirmed. 17 conflicts resolved, 43 worlds implementing collaborative resource management, and now this. The Zephyr system has gone from being the galaxy's most contested territory to its most productive manufacturing center. A new transmission joined their conversation. Marcus recognized the voice immediately. Admiral Kethrin of the Rakthul clans, the warrior species they'd helped integrate months earlier. Regent Voss. Kethrin's rough voice carried amusement. My scouts report that the Zephyr system is now producing defensive technologies more advanced than anything in the Council's arsenal. Perhaps it is time to admit that the humans' approach has merit. Admiral, you're monitoring Council communications? I am monitoring friends, Regent. The humans taught my people that former enemies can become allies when you change the rules of engagement. Perhaps it is time for the Council to learn the same lesson. Marcus could see the walls coming down in real time. Across their communication network, messages were pouring in from worlds throughout the galaxy. Species that had never spoken to each other directly were sharing innovations, combining technologies, solving problems that had persisted for generations. The network is becoming self-sustaining, James reported with excitement. Worlds are starting to bypass council bureaucracy entirely, establishing direct relationships with other species. They're sharing technology, resources, cultural knowledge. This is what galactic civilization should look like, Dr. Martinez added. Not a hierarchy controlled by a central authority, but a collaborative network where every species contributes their unique strengths. Zarathan moved to stand beside Marcus, her golden eyes reflecting the nebula's swirling colors. You've done something remarkable, she said quietly. You've shown the galaxy that there are alternatives to the way things have always been done. We've shown them that humans don't know when to quit, Marcus replied with a grin. Sometimes ignorance really is an advantage. Regent Voss's voice interrupted their moment. Coalition for Galactic Reform, this is Regent Voss. I am ordering the Council fleet to stand down. I will be returning to Council headquarters to present your results to the full assembly. What will you tell them? Hayes asked. The truth, that humanity has accomplished in months what we failed to accomplish in centuries. That their approaches work better than ours. That perhaps it's time for the Council to evolve. And if they refuse to listen? Voss was quiet for a moment. Then I suspect they'll discover that the galaxy has evolved without them. Your network has given individual worlds the ability to solve their own problems. The Council's authority depends on being necessary. If worlds no longer need us, they might choose to govern themselves, Marcus finished. True democracy on a galactic scale. Yes, and perhaps that's what should have happened centuries ago. As the transmission ended, Marcus looked around at his team. A physicist who had redefined the laws of resource distribution, a programmer who had built a galactic internet from spare parts and alien technology, a military officer who had revolutionized interspecies diplomacy, and an alien queen who had shown them all that the impossible was just another word for hasn't been tried yet. So what's next? He asked. Next we go home, Dr. Martinez said. Earth still doesn't officially know that aliens exist. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Next we keep building, James added. The network is growing, but it needs guidance, maintenance, improvement. We've started something that's bigger than any of us. Next we prepare, Hayes said with military pragmatism. Not everyone in the galaxy will be happy with the changes we've initiated. Some people benefit from the old system and they won't give up power easily. And next, Zarathan said with a smile that transformed her entire face, we find more strays to help, because that's what humans do, isn't it? You see someone in need and you help regardless of the consequences. Marcus thought about that night 6 months ago, when he'd opened his window to let in a stray cat during a thunderstorm. Such a small gesture, such enormous consequences. Yeah, he said finally, that's exactly what we do. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same warehouse where it had all begun. But now it hummed with activity from dozens of humans and several alien species working together on projects that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. The Coalition for Galactic Reform had grown from 5 people to a movement spanning hundreds of worlds. His communicator chimed with an incoming message from Zarathan, who was currently helping establish a new collaborative research station in the Andromeda sector. The message was simple. Found 3 more strays who need help. Sending coordinates. Marcus looked at the attached data and saw the specifications for what appeared to be a completely different type of problem, something involving temporal mechanics and a species that existed partially outside normal space-time. He smiled and started gathering his team. After all, what was the point of proving that humans could solve impossible problems if you stopped trying just because things got interesting? Outside his window, Seattle looked exactly the same as it always had. But Marcus knew that appearances could be deceiving. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking places turned out to be the beginning of something extraordinary. And sometimes, all it took was being willing to help a stray.